Are you there? Yeah. I've been given precise instructions on how to behave. I'm sort of tethered to the microphone, so to speak. This means I can't exceed a certain posture, otherwise I'll be standing here rooted to the spot, and then for the next 40 minutes or so, I'll be telling you some very unusual things that you've probably never heard before in this form, but which, from my point of view, do have a certain significance, also for remote viewing, also for the further development of people once they have understood what our consciousness really does, and also how remote viewing can help to further develop consciousness. In other words, we heard in the previous presentation that all of this is very practical and very down to earth in terms of marketing, also for customers who are interested in obtaining new information. Remote viewing can actually be applied in a completely different way, for example, to optimize the functioning of consciousness and thus give us humans entirely new ways to experience reality, but also to provide ways of interacting with each other. And some of what's going on in society isn't exactly 100% optimal. And if people had the impulse, so to speak, to change something about themselves and also a way in which awareness spreads, then that could certainly have a certain impact on society. That was at least the hope I had in 1996, which hasn't yet materialized to that extent, maybe in the fraction of a percent range, but not beyond that. But we're just at the very beginning. Yes, so my lecture topic is remote viewing in the game of life. And it actually begins with me asking the question, why do we actually enjoy playing Don't Get Angry so much? Or Monopoly? Why do we go to the movies? Why do we listen to fairy tales? So we somehow love to immerse ourselves in virtual worlds and act according to the rules of these virtual worlds. We then easily identify with these virtual worlds, and what we get out of it is the excitement, the thrill, or horror, or fun. This leads us to build virtual worlds ourselves. Some write books, some play with Lego, we make all kinds of complicated buildings or airplanes and such. Some make movies. I already mentioned that. So for the next 9 minutes, I'm going to show you a few things I've put together about the virtual experiences available today, so that you can see, if you haven't had any experience yourself, how it works, and above all, how quickly you can identify with what's happening. And the first world I'm going to introduce to you is the Minecraft world. It is one that children as young as 4 can play, in principle. A world that consists only of blocks, of cubes, and where you can build things together. Cars, landscapes, animals, people, all sorts of things, all built from blocks. And it all makes sense when you keep in mind that we humans in our reality are made up of atoms. In other words, the atoms are essentially simplified to these cubes, and complex worlds are built from them, in which, for example, tools are created, tools that you need in order to exist in this world at all. In the second world, in the second Minecraft world, it is much less simple. It is more oriented towards everyday life, where vehicles are more complex. Various interactions are shown, but again, everything is made of blocks. And in the third simulation, it is about 2 players who can step into the roles of famous tennis players and then play against each other. This means these simulations are not movies that people watch, but in these simulations they can act quite freely and, so to speak, move around in this world. And this gives you an experience that can be completely different from what normally happens in everyday life. You experience the situation, so to speak. In the 4th video, which some of you may know, I believe there are now 6 or 7 versions of Grand Theft Auto. It is all about stealing cars, running, shooting, driving, flying. And then it is like this for the player who engages in this simulation. At certain points, they see points of action displayed, so they know where to focus in the complex game scene. There are points to be scored, that is how the game progresses, so to speak. And so you can follow along a bit. Let us just get started and you can watch the minutes I hope this works out. Either it comes out of there or from that or not at all. We will see. In any case, I hope it is loud enough for you to have heard it. And do not forget, as I said, these games that do this, they experience it as if they were really acting almost like that in reality. And things like gravity, inertia, and reactions from other game characters are also very similar to how we interact with each other in our society. So you really get immersed in the game world, and now it begins. Well, what food is there, and how can I make sure I don't starve anymore? Before we start with the food, I need to address something briefly. Some people have said that there's no campfire on the PlayStation. Exactly. That's why we have our oven. And the oven has a slot on top where we put in what we want to roast, and a slot where we put in coal. But I haven't found any coal. What do I do now? Then you can put in wood and you make charcoal. It's that simple. Then you can put the charcoal in the bottom and use it to roast your meat. Ta-da! Question answered. Well, of course, we were lucky to have roasted mutton because of the sheep and also the campfire. That's why we don't have such a food shortage now, but of course we also need to plan for the future. First of all, we'll make ourselves a shovel. It's for earth and gravel and also clay. But for that, we go back in here and we can already see there are a few tools like stone pickaxes and so on. A wooden shovel, but I'd like to make myself a stone shovel. We click on that and we have a stone shovel. Very good. Okay. That means we'll just dig ourselves a small staircase down here so we can at least always get down from our mountain quickly and don't always have to climb somehow. Oh, here's some more coal. We've really been quite lucky with that here in our world. You don't always have that. So this is granite now. I think we'll have to get out the pickaxe. And I hope it holds up since it's only made of wood. So here again, just like this, and there's the end of the world, or rather the mountain. What is there to eat? Primarily there's meat and plant-based food. We can chop down the grass here and we already have a seed that we can plant. These are grains of wheat. They're good food, but of course they don't grow so quickly. They need their time. So we'll keep looking. We'll plant and grow everything we can find to survive at the beginning. We can of course kill the animals, but that's only a short-term solution because then we have the food and the animal is gone. But we can also take the wheat grains and let's see. The sheep isn't too keen on wheat grains somehow, is it?
No.
But I saw cows back there and the cows, they like wheat grains. Not them either.
Rafael Nadal.
Novak Djokovic.
Nadal to serve. Left.
Yes, so it's not that difficult to identify with these game worlds or to immerse yourself in them. And it's actually strange why we do this, why we seek this kind of entertainment. And that raises the question. Have any of you ever had the feeling in life that this whole thing is staged? Like some kind of event, a funny game? One? Me too. And I've encountered it several times. As a child and teenager, I was very interested in science fiction. So I always wanted to live in more advanced worlds with new possibilities. Later, my interest developed towards fantastic phenomena like firewalking, telepathy, telekinesis, and so on. That was very important to me, and like a common thread, for me, future development consisted of technological advancement and consciousness development in order to be able to use these additional capabilities of consciousness at all. As a student in physics class in 11th grade, we were told that light sometimes behaves as a wave and sometimes as a particle. That was the so-called double slit experiment, in which light could be shown to behave in different ways. And then it became completely clear to me that light can be neither one nor the other, but we weren't told what it actually is. And interestingly, neither the teacher nor my classmates were interested in what it is, but I was bothered by not getting that answer. And I thought to myself, maybe I would get an answer to that sometime in the future. Later, I became a software developer, consultant, and project manager, and was naturally very influenced by computers and technology again. But still, consciousness was always the topic that interested and fascinated me the most. Unfortunately, there was very, very little information about it. When I did my training in Beverly Hills in 1996, on the second day of training, it seemed to me as if we humans were all walking around here like bio-robots, experiencing things together, and the dear God up there sits on his sofa, watching what we're up to on billions of screens. And this idea was absolutely not satisfying for me and really messed up my worldview. And I needed a long walk on the beach of Santa Monica first, so that I could calm down again and continue my training at all. Yes, once again, I postponed the explanation for what's really happening there to the future. Later, I did quite a number of energy and perception trainings, which all somehow worked. Among others, there was an Oleg Lonis, an energy healer from Belarus, who has been offering courses and seminars in Ingelheim am Rhein for decades. And he told me, life is occupational therapy. Everyone treats themselves. Somehow it reminded me again that the question about the meaning of life and the possibilities of our consciousness are still somehow unanswered for me. With Oleg, we also do an energy projection and an energy perception exercise as part of an advanced training. And it went like this. We were all in the room. It was a training room as big as this one, with chairs and so on. And all the chairs were moved to the side. And one of the trainers then went out into the hallway. So he doesn't know what happened next. And then Oleg told another trainer to now take this room, this empty room, and just imagine a vase according to his own imagination, and place it somewhere in the room, or let others know where it is. So he did that, and then the trainer was called back in from the hallway. He was already sensitized in the advanced training and was actually able to find this vase and properly describe its shape. And this means that we can create objects with our consciousness. These are objects that are not intense enough to be visible. But these are objects that can be perceived with a sensitized perception. So they are real energetic objects. In 2003, I then read the book Those at the End of the Universe by Manfred Glensky. The first attempt to publish an article titled How Real is Reality. I just found those 2 pages again this week. I printed it out. You can read through it to see how I thought back then. Back then, in 2003, after the experience with remote viewing, it became clear to me that our consciousness is the driving force in this reality, and that this is the place where we create reality, where we ourselves give reality. And seemingly impossible athletic performances, extreme feats by people that are occasionally reported in the media, they go beyond what scientists and doctors actually believe is possible for the human body. And over the years, there has always been an increase, where you reach a limit and then there's another improvement. And that also shows that there must be something special about the body. It's just that good. And over these years, I've had very different experiences. They've shown me that you can do many extraordinary things with your consciousness if you engage with it intensively enough. So it doesn't just happen effortlessly, you have to do it, you have to repeat it. You also need to have tolerance for frustration when it doesn't work. You also have to firmly believe that you can actually do it. So to speak, this feeling of omnipotence while practicing will lead to overcoming difficulties over time and then being able to apply it. So a little flashback. After returning from training in Los Angeles in 1996, I started offering remote viewing training here in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland with Tom Tanker. Our motto, with which we went out into the world back then, was, "We don't know how it works, but we know that it works." That was a good marketing slogan, but it didn't satisfy our own curiosity at all because we wanted to know how it works. For all those who are not yet familiar with the details, here's a very brief summary of how remote viewing works. So you get a task for a target area in the form of a coordinate. You create an uncontrolled line on the paper ideomotorically, that is, quite spontaneously. And these lines are called an ideogram. And from this line, you can then read further information. You can read information from the line, and you can perceive this information in the form of ideas that emerge or also through sensory impressions such as a color or smell. Or you can also perceive this information in the form of a model by simply scanning these things and then getting information about objects in the target through the scanning in this virtual space. Yes, and this whole state that you're in, so to speak, is supported by the stage protocol modules. During such a session, you can establish a very direct and intense contact with aspects of the target area. And this entire process, as we've all seen, somehow worked, but no one can say exactly how or why. And so, more and more questions arose for us. And to clarify these questions step by step, we made contact 25 years ago with, sadly now deceased, brain researcher Gunther, and he conducted brainwave measurements 25 years ago during our modulating sessions, and thereby proved that at the moment when one creates the ideogram, the brain transitions into a different vibrational state. This means you can see that something physically changes in response to creating the ideogram. So one achieves a vibrational state as this operational state, and this other state that is then reached is supported by the remote viewing protocol and makes it possible for the remote viewer to perceive non-local information and record it for later evaluation. That's what we just heard earlier, protocols, reports, and so on and so forth. I also found it interesting that working with the line of the ideogram made such a deep connection to aspects of the target area possible. This wasn't just a fleeting contact, Paul can confirm that too. You can work on an ideogram for 3 or 4 days, and then through processing the ideogram, you can essentially already move within the target. So it goes quite far. So what were we really dealing with in the ideogram? And it was equally significant that AOLs and AIs somehow appear in every remote viewing session. That means fantasy impressions and personal sensitivities and feelings. And why did these fantasy impressions and feelings have to appear? Why couldn't they simply be avoided? And above all, what actually was an idea in the first place? What is an idea that comes with it? So those were the questions that occupied us. The ideogram thus became an important point of reference in the search for further explanations. But if you think about it, non-local perception. That is, it's explained as the connection of consciousness with the matrix. Okay, but what is the matrix? And where is the matrix? New questions again? So answers to these questions lead to new questions. And now it was supposed to be quantum wrapped, that is, quantum entanglement. Quantum entanglement was supposed to be the answer to the connection between the viewer and the target area. After all, this connection that one establishes seemed to be independent of distance, space, and time. It couldn't be shielded, and it was also supposed to occur in 0 time. A quantum effect somehow sounded totally plausible. A quantum effect of superluminal entanglement. Something is happening down there somewhere. It was just unsatisfying that despite decades of research, no suitable approach was found to explain how a biological system, like us humans, could even be capable of generating consciousness from biology. So there's only perplexity. You can make biological systems more complex, and we're already cynical enough, and yet it's not apparent why consciousness should develop from this. So this question remains unanswered to this day, but there were questions about what consciousness actually does. Namely, the fact that our eyes and the rods and cones in our eyes can produce an image on the retina with just one lens. But through this one lens, the image on the retina is upside down, yet we all demonstrably know that we don't see things around us upside down, which means that between what falls onto the retina and what we later perceive as environmental information, a whole series of transformations must take place before we even get such an impression of our surroundings. Physics has told us that in principle, these visual and auditory impressions are merely vibrations of mixed frequencies that we transform into experiences. In other words, we transform these stimuli into experiences, so to speak. This is a first clear indication that what's out there around us can be something completely different from what we subsequently project into our inner world as a product of experience. Research results on autonomous driving have shown that our eyes have a receptive area of approximately 130 megapixels. So they are a very, very good camera. And when we perceive with these eyes, they're just pixels. Pixels that are somehow stimulated, so to speak. And we then actually convert these pixels into objects. But when it comes to converting pixels, that's also the difficult part for autonomous vehicles. For certain constellations, there are many, many different alternatives for what the situational context might be. And it has been discovered that with mathematical methods, given a number of 20 different alternative contexts that result from the pixels, one cannot determine through mathematical functions what the actual event is that one is seeing. This means that the subconscious can do it. Computers can't do that. And our consciousness can do this because it introduces something that can be called adaptive behavior. That is, consciousness knows more and can therefore transform these pixel lights into an accurate scenario that we then perceive correctly as an experience. Yes, fortunately, I wasn't the only person who has dealt with questions about the nature of consciousness. There was someone else of a different opinion named Donald Hoffman, who is a professor of cognitive sciences at the University of California, Irvine. He conducted research on artificial intelligence at MIT and worked on the development of simulation systems. So, like Grand Theft Auto for the military, in that direction. He has published several books. He is a recognized scientist, an acknowledged expert on perception issues. He is a sought-after consultant and expert in the field of perception and marketing. Professor Hoffman's interest was to formulate perception topics in mathematical models and to substantiate his theories of consciousness through logic, probabilities, and evolutionary game theory. Unlike many of his scientific colleagues, Donald Hoffman's research led him to conclude as early as 1987 that consciousness cannot arise from the complexity of biological systems of neurons, but that consciousness is fundamental. In contrast to the theory of evolution, in which consciousness has developed in the three-dimensional world over time, his thesis is that consciousness was there first and has been creating the universe and its everyday world ever since. It was helpful for his research that quantum physics, through experiments in particle accelerators, gained ever deeper insights into subatomic dynamics, and that high-energy physics has now clearly come to the conclusion that our space-time is not fundamental. On the one hand, physics has proven that our physical laws can only apply consistently if atoms have no mass. And on the other hand, it was proven by means of Planck's constants for space and time that both are quantized. Distances smaller than 6 times 10 to the power of negative 34 meters end in nothing. And for time, there is also nothing below the granulation of 5 times 10 to the power of negative 44 seconds. So we live in a space-time. Yes, we live in a space-time. And it has a finite resolution, in which atoms have no mass. The double-slit experiment and the observer effect were also stripped of their strangeness. It actually became clear that the observed effects must, in principle, be projections of our consciousness. The conclusions from these connections are: one conclusion from this is that our space-time and all things in it, including ourselves, are not fundamental. So if they are not fundamental and we can still perceive them, then the question is, then these perceived entities can only be projections, specifically projections of consciousness. So is there nothing out there at all? Is there no reality? Then one hopes that there really is something out there. Something that completely differs from how we perceive it. According to his research, there are data structures out there, for example, objects that carry color, shape, smell, taste, functions, and many other attributes. This area out there is called the environment by researchers. Our consciousness decodes these data sets and generates from them the object that we perceive with our 5 senses. For reasons of efficiency and limited resources, these objects are discarded as soon as consciousness shifts its attention, and if needed, these objects are then recreated. For the sake of clarity, it must be said again that this means our biological bodies are also just projections. To clarify the question of why we perceive things the way we do, Hoffman refers to evolutionary biology, because evolutionary biology is the best presented and most elaborated field of research about humans. We are familiar with the motto of Darwin's theory of evolution: survival of the fittest, survival of the best adapted. Adapted for what? For survival and reproduction through mating? The game was on. The core statements of this theory are that a person should ideally survive until they have reproduced. This includes defense against dangers, food, optimal mate selection, and many other things. So perception is focused on these priority aspects. Furthermore, Hoffman discussed the scientific development of game theories, in particular the evolutionary game theories of natural selection. This raised a question that has been on scientists' minds for decades, namely, whether people with reality-faithful perception can survive better or worse than people with perception focused on priority aspects. To this end, Hoffman, in collaboration with mathematicians, developed population models that have shown in simulations over several hundred generations that populations focused on priority aspects, or fitness points in English, prospered and were able to evolve, while populations focused on reality-faithful perception, i.e. truth, died out through natural selection. This was an unexpected result. At first, scientists suspected that it could be because there are so many more details in the environment than necessary for survival, and that this would explain the disadvantage. But further research revealed that the advantage of the fitness point perceivers was the adaptive behavior they could exhibit by exploiting the fitness points, and that this gave them an advantage. After the many clear simulation results, the mathematical proof followed, based on evolutionary game theory and Bayesian decision theory. The result of the proof led to Hoffman's fitness beats truth theory and is considered proven with its derivation. And that was the virtual one, where I don't have as much knowledge. So this is, so to speak, a game character that experiences 3D. This is now that ominous formula which proves that people who have priority-oriented perception are better off than those who have natural perception. So this is the formula 3 divided by n minus 1. This is the mathematical formula for the probability of superiority of fitness perception, and is the number of states that can be perceived. Our two states would be, for example, red and green. And 10 states would be red, green, sweet, sour, big, small. That means, in effect, many others. And now you can imagine that our reality consists of millions of states. And if you now plug in 1 million for this, if it's 1 million minus 3 divided by 1 million minus 1, it's approximately 100%, approximately 1. So this is the reason why, with an increase in states, this optimized perception ultimately proves to be increasingly superior. The formal proof is 32 pages long and requires a mathematics education. In short, however, the formula means the more states an environment has, the closer the probability that fitness cruises overtakes and displaces approaches 100%. And if you want to read up on this now and are despairing of your mathematical knowledge, you just need to enter this HSCP address and then it will get easier. Yes, this result ultimately led to the question of what we actually see when we perceive something. Hoffman developed the theory that the true complexity of our environment in its real nature is hidden behind simple symbols. Symbols that we know and can deal with. He compares these symbols to icons that we know from our computer. We also have a word program there. We click on a simple icon and it starts. To be able to race 50 kilometers through the countryside in a red Ferrari on a gaming computer in a simulation game like Grand Theft Auto, a player only needs a computer, 3D glasses, headphones, gas pedal, brake, a steering wheel, and a keyboard. Let's see if we can get a good provider. This means that, equipped like this, you can now optimally participate in such a virtual game. In fact, when you play your game now and drive through the countryside in the red Ferrari, there is neither a red Ferrari nor the necessary controls in the computer. There is also no road and there is no landscape. Instead, there are billions of semiconductors that switch their voltage back and forth in nanoseconds to create the illusion of a fast car ride for the player. So something completely different is happening there. If the player looks to the left with his 3D glasses, the landscape to the left of the Ferrari is built up for him in real time, and if he looks ahead, then this landscape to the left of the Ferrari is discarded. Garbage collection to save resources. So the player uses a simple interface to be able to participate in the game action. In the same way, Hoffman describes the interface theory of perception and the concept of perception in our everyday life. Our consciousness, he calls it a consciousness agent, in Hoffman's terminology, is equipped with a 3D headset that is geared towards perceiving objects with fitness-relevant qualities. We therefore only perceive the icons that are arranged on a desktop of space-time. This interface has evolved evolutionarily. The actors in this process are our consciousness agents. What our consciousness agents do is participate in the perceive-decide act, PDA cycle. Find PDA? Exactly. And we know this PDA, namely, it's exactly the process that we have broken down in the ring. That means we ask questions of the target area. We receive answers from the target area through perception. This generates an idea or a bodily perception for us. We reposition ourselves, ask a new question, and with this new positioning, we continue to inquire. This process happens continuously. And this exact same process also occurs in reality. There, it is called something different. We act in the world and gain experience through it. These experiences compel us to make decisions, which in turn lead to other actions. So in essence, we are ultimately doing nothing different than in everyday life, just a bit more deliberately. So, Hoffman assumes a resource limitation of space-time projection, which results in our cleaning of fitness points. Having to work with means of data compression and error correction. In other words, this perception is optimized, so to speak, because our reality has finite resources. And we can observe how our perception is corrected and optimized in these examples. Here on the left side, you can see 4 circles with these white cutouts. But as soon as these 4 circles are arranged like this, we can perceive a square there. And we can also see here, for example, that we perceive connecting lines where we believe there are connecting lines. We project this because we see it as a coherent part, even though it is not actually there. And here you can see that very clearly again. Here we now have this square. This W corresponds exactly to this white, and yet we see it as something blue. This means we have simply projected it because our contextual reference says it belongs together, and that is why I show it that way in the projection. Here it is exactly the same. So here you can see that colors and surfaces have a very special effect. Namely, we see here a delicious strawberry surface that does not look so appetizing anymore when it is green. Yeah. We see here. Exactly. We see these vegetables here which cannot look as delicious as when they are red. So what does our projection do with this? It cleverly uses colors and surfaces to create very dramatic reactions. Reactions that you do not expect at all if you are not aware of them. So here we have another example, because I have the neutral color red. Well, but here we have another berry that looks quite nice. To me, this does not look particularly appetizing now. However, my partner said, I find that attractive. I rather think it looks like a botched dental procedure. This means you can see here that colors and surfaces do something to us. Yeah. They are implemented very efficiently and effectively. So here you can see examples of the optimization of our perception, that is, the optimization of projection, where we can clearly see that these two immediately catch the eye. These two also immediately. This means that the difference in intensity or size, the difference in direction, is immediately perceived by us. But if you look at this example on the left, what is going on there? You have to search for a long time until you find the 5. This means that this amplification and optimization effect does not work for all configurations. So here we have the 5 that you have not found yet, here a 5, and here we also have a 5. I will. Here we see that we are simply forming a group. This one here is still completely neutral, but here is a group formation because they happen to be gray. Here's another group formation because they happen to be gray. And here's a group formation because it has different shapes. Here, a group formation because it has different sizes. In other words, these are the optimization mechanisms that ensure that even in a limited space-time with limited information that we can transport, we receive satisfying impressions that are suitable for everyday use and that guide us in our actions towards adopting and increasing fitness points. This goes even further in the direction of your analysis. People look into each other's eyes not because they think it's so great, but because they want to find out about the other person's state of health. You can tell by the white eye, the colored eye, what is strong, whether it is pressed, and so on. This means that the health status of the other party is scanned underneath with the aim of mating. Not in every case. This means, for example, that this archaic need still comes through in our behavior. Yeah? Okay. You can always watch. Yeah. So, our negotiations are therefore projections, and sometimes something goes wrong in the construction of this projection. In any case, however, what is perceived is constantly rebuilt. Yes, this is proof that sometimes things go wrong. Just take a look at the front, and then close your eyes, open your eyes again. Repeat this a few times. The cube is called a nectar cube. Nectar. You must have discovered this. So sometimes this is the front surface and sometimes this is the front surface. So, but neither is there. This is not a cube. In our projection, we make cubes out of it, and since something specific is ambiguous here, we make the cube this way or that way. In any case, we make a projection. It is not a cube. The question now arises as to why our consciousness participates in this joint projection. We know that their projected embodiments, i.e. us, behave according to the donations of evolution. And the benefit for the consciousness units are the feelings and sensitivities known in the homophy method as A. These feelings are therefore not projections, but are also fundamental experiences of consciousness. So is there something we can recognize in the realm of existence of our consciousness, existence donor consciousness, we call it from outside in space, something we can recognize? We already know that we are living in a space-time reaction and that what is out there, what we perceive, is completely different. And then, of course, we also want to know what the situation is and whether there are any findings. So, our language of perception, that is, what we do in order to communicate, see and hear, is definitely not suitable for describing this external space. Just as the language of Grand Theft Auto, namely a steering wheel, a brake and a keyboard, is not suitable for describing the processes on the computer. So we need a different language. Fortunately, evolution has given us an opportunity with the big one, and with it the ability to develop mathematics and logic. Without the great projection, we will not be able to do math and logic. It is hoped that by means of mathematics and logic, we will be able to regenerate the 3D interface that is inherent to us as human beings. I believe that we really perceive this simple 3D reality through 3D glasses. And when it is decoded, we can free ourselves from this interface through an expanded understanding, and we can at least modify it, create a better interface. The development of new mathematical models over the last 10 years has already made it possible for us to mathematically identify objects in this outside space-time. These are objects that project into our space-time and produce the dynamics on the quantum level of our space-time. These objects that have been discovered are called amplitude herons and cosmological polytopies. She is now, I said. They are geometric figures that can project not only our three-dimensional space-time, but also many other, much higher dimensional universes. This discovery has indeed already brought a first benefit, this discovery of theoretical objects in outer space, namely quantum dynamic effects of the collision of leptons, such as, for example, is done at CERN, which in the past could only be described using very, very elaborate and complex forms of calculation, can now be simulated using just 3 simple equations. In other words, this external world with its geometric shapes gives us answers as to how our space-time functions at the quantum level. Hoffman has already begun to mathematically model interactions of consciousness agents. His goal is to create models for all aspects of everyday life, for cosmology, and also for quantum dynamics, as well as all dynamics in human evolution. He actually has it pretty easy because he knows how evolution has proceeded. He also knows how our world works today. When he creates his models, he simply has to check whether these models show the result that we see here in our space-time, and he knows that he has done it correctly. So it was actually foolproof. So what benefit do I now derive from Hoffman's research work? If Hoffman is right, and this explains how remote viewing works, then he has actually done a really tough part of his job. That is a big challenge overcome. From the perspective of evolution, and of course even more from the viewpoint of convenience, I would then like to follow up on his research and see what useful insights can still be derived from this for the topic of remote viewing. Let us just test whether Hoffman's research results can help us answer my question about the humor thing and other exciting topics. With the spontaneous ideomotor creation of an ideogram, we produce a three-dimensional representation of any kind of form on paper. This is how it will be for us in remote viewing training. It seems plausible to me that the entities in the external world with attributes such as shape, colors, surface, smell, taste, but also positioning in time, could very well be the fundamental forms, or at least references to these forms. We then decode the attributes of these forms from the ideogram in a very similar way to how we do it with our sensory organs. And in any case, we then have rich perceptual experiences, our body, and we produce ideas in real time as a result, so to speak, of these data requests and transformation. Each individual attribute of a form is then an idea. That's why most ideas are just one word, because this bottle has different attributes. It is solid, it is tall, it is round, but this bottle doesn't tell sentences. It describes itself in individual attributes. And these individual attributes are exactly what we pick up during remote viewing. That's why we're always so brief when things are going well. In everyday life, we are evolutionarily geared towards fitness principles. Why? Because evolution wants to keep us alive in this dynamic. This means we have to find our optimum so that we can survive and reproduce. That's the thinking behind it. From an evolutionary perspective, distant objects and events are completely uninteresting as fitness points. If I, as a human, can run perhaps 12 kilometers quickly, then I know exactly that there's no danger 50 kilometers away. Or even some delicious food that's there, I can't reach it. So it's not interesting for me. This is also why we can't do much remotiviering in everyday life, because there's simply no reward stemming from this archaic evolutionary behavior. In our selective perception, we are noticeably focused on benefits and rewards, and if the viewer now leaves the window of spontaneity, their intellect begins to associatively link the spontaneous ideas that have arrived up to that point with other existing information, assuming that this combination will result in fitness points. And that's exactly what leads to the aha moment. Hence our desperation, we cobble something together. That's why the 3-second rule of the moment is so important in the context of the RV protocol, that we really need to pay attention to it. The spontaneous ideomotor hand movement with focus of attention on the form and the altered brain dynamics can thus be seen as a successful attempt. To give the consciousness agent in the viewer, as our consciousness, direct access to the projected motor functions of our body. The body is also a projection, bypassing the evolutionary rules of the game. The protocol helps to keep attention on the ideogram as a reference to the form, and the viewer now gains fitness points merely by adhering to the protocol. It's not much of an incentive. That's why it's so difficult to get excited about it. Rob Coward said it back then. As a motivator in the American military, recognized in such a memorable moment when he enters the room, in other words, structure, contents relevant. That means he had a flash of insight at that moment that said, it really comes down to sticking to the structure and you have to not give a damn about the content. I'm also not allowed to link them in any way. This direct access of consciousness works well as long as we can successfully keep appointments. The viewer must therefore remain neutral and must manage without recognition. In other words, as we said earlier, we always wanted to have a reward. We want to know afterwards what it was. We're so eager to know what it was. No. We must not want to know. And then we're neutral enough to do it really well. We have to get used to that. So then we are, so to speak, 100% free from this conditioning of our archaic behavior. If the viewer now produces an AOL, they are initially cut off from the direct access of their consciousness to the body, to the ideomotor response, and they have lost access to ideas and must first, through neutralization measures, ensure that they can return to this special state of perception of the RV protocol. Since the viewer lacks the conditioned image structures of everyday life, there's no one there to say, "You're doing great, that's awesome. Oh wow, what did you find out there?" None of that is there. And that's why the reaction behavior of many viewers initially appears apathetic and lacking in drive. As a monitor, you often have to nudge them again when they become demotivated, so to speak, to get them to continue a bit, which they're not necessarily excited about, to grind through the sieve. Yes, if all this is true, then the remote viewing protocol can be seen as a successful approach to create a modification of our three-dimensional interface that frees us from our evolutionary conditioning. How was it even possible to develop the protocol? Evolution has shown that it also allows for experiments. Synesthetes have color, sound, or taste impressions accompanying their perception of numbers, objects, and other things, which enable a very individual experience. And some women are actually born with 4 color receptors instead of 3, resulting in completely different everyday experiences regarding colors. So evolution allows for experiments, and perhaps Unus Swan, with his very experience-oriented yet highly structured approach, was such an evolutionary experiment. Let's see where this leads us. If all these processes take place in a projected universe, then it is clear that space and time are no obstacle at all for the work. And there is also no need to synchronize the information. This also explains why distant healing and spontaneous healing are possible, because all that is needed is to restore or download the original data structure of the diseased body. And just like that, the body is healthy again. It is just a projection after all. Then we can just as easily hop, and the cube has become a circle. We can do the same thing. UFOs can spontaneously appear and disappear in a projected everyday world. They can change shape, they can perform capers, and our simple 3D interface can prevent us from seeing alien spirits, angels, or unicorns, even though they surround us. They are simply filtered out. If we can develop technical systems from these new scientific and mathematical insights that are currently being gained, then perhaps one day we will be able to, in 0 time, teleport to Andromeda, a truly brave new world of the game of life.